There is a list dealers do not show at boat shows. It is not the price sheet, not the rebate calendar, and not the flashy new for 2026 lineup. It is the mental top 10 they keep in their heads when a friend asks, off the record, what would you actually hang on your own transom right now? That list looks nothing like the ads. A few engines that were hyped as the future are nowhere near the top. A couple of models most boaters ignore are suddenly almost impossible to find used because dealers keep buying them back. By the end of this video, you will know which specific engines dealers secretly trust the most for 2026, what they are actually paying extra for on trade-ins, and which future-proof motors are quietly slipping down the list. Today, we are going to walk through that unofficial ranking and why it matters more than any brochure you have ever read. Number 10. Suzuki DF140. Ask any dealer which engines end up on rental fleets, and they will not start by talking about horsepower or color. They will talk about which ones almost never generate a panicked call from a tourist who has drifted onto a sandbar at sunset. In that world, exciting does not matter. Predictable does. Once you filter the options through that lens of quiet reliability and low drama, one 140 horsepower four-stroke keeps rising to the surface, and that is where the Suzuki DF140A comes in. Dealers like that, it hits a rare balance. It is significantly lighter than many comparable four-stroke engines, which means it does not bury the stern of a modest center console or bay boat. It benefits from a timing chain instead of a belt, which technicians know tends to stretch gracefully rather than suddenly fail. On the water, owners describe it as feeling closer to a 150 horsepower engine than the badge suggests, especially in the mid-range, where most real boating happens. On the used side, numbers tell their own story. A few years ago, a clean DF140A could often be found in the $6,000 United States dollar range. Now, dealers report that the same engines, if serviced properly and with honest hour counts, sell closer to $9,000 United States dollars without much negotiation. One Gulf Coast dealer put it simply. He said that the DF140A is the only 140 horsepower engine he can put into a rental fleet without keeping his phone beside the bed at night. The engine is not perfect, no outboard is. But when you combine its weight, its fuel burn, and the relatively low rate of ugly surprises in the service department, it earns its way onto this list. It is the kind of engine that seems almost boring on the spec sheet, and then quietly refuses to give you drama season after season. Number 9. Yamaha F70. Some of the most important engines on the water are the ones nobody brags about at the dock. They hang off the back of skiffs, small aluminum boats, and work hulls that leave the ramp before sunrise and come back after dark. On those boats, every extra kilogram on the transom is a problem, and every unnecessary trip to the fuel dock is money lost. Inside that very specific world of small but serious boats, a light, efficient 70 horsepower four-stroke quietly became a favorite. And that is the niche the Yamaha F70 has filled. The F70 came in dramatically lighter than many older four-stroke designs. On paper, that weight figure just looks like a number. On a 16 to 18-foot skiff or aluminum boat, it feels like a completely different hull. The transom sits higher. The boat pops onto plane instead of slogging. Fuel burn stays low because the engine is not fighting its own mass. That combination, genuine 70 horsepower performance in a package closer to an old two-stroke in weight, made it a quiet favorite among technicians who fish shallow water themselves. Over time, the market noticed. As new engines crept upward in both price and complexity, clean F70 engines started to feel like artifacts from a slightly simpler era. Dealers in coastal markets describe situations where used F70 engines now sell for close to, and sometimes even above, their original manufacturer's suggested retail price, if hours are low and service history is documented. This is not because the F70 is rare, it is because it hits a narrow target. Enough power for small boats that do real work, light enough to avoid transom surgery, and simple enough that long-term ownership does not feel like a gamble. It is not the engine that wins boat show dyno contests. It is the engine that quietly keeps showing up on small workboats and family skiffs when people care more about reliability than brand bragging rights. Number 8. Mercury 94-stroke. Ask a technician which engines almost never star in angry conversations, and a certain mid-range 4-stroke keeps appearing. It is not the loudest in marketing, but it is strangely absent from the horror stories. When dealers talk about motors that just do their job year after year, this one sits firmly in that category. From a technician's point of view, the 90-horsepower 4-stroke has a few key advantages. It runs quietly enough that first-time buyers are not shocked by noise on delivery day. Its fuel burn sits in a range that makes the transition from an older 2-stroke feel like a genuine savings, not just a brochure promise. And perhaps most importantly, the internal design has settled into a comfortable maturity. Many units run well past 1,800 or 2,000 hours with only routine maintenance, especially in freshwater environments. Resale reflects that. Clean engines in this range often move between roughly $7,500 and $9,000 United States dollars, depending on rigging and controls. That stability matters to dealers who need trade-ins to hold value, and it matters to owners who may want to upgrade hulls without selling their engine at a painful discount. You will find online debates about whether this engine is exciting. Most technicians do not care about that argument. They care about cold starts, clean oil samples, and the number of times a customer appears at the service counter genuinely angry. On those metrics, the 90-horsepower 4-stroke from Mercury earns a quiet nod of respect. It might not headline a performance shootout, but for 2026, it sits comfortably on the short list of engines dealers do not mind seeing again and again. Number 7. Honda F150. Every shop has a few engines they point to when the topic turns to what actually survives abuse. These are the motors bolted to charter rigs, workboats, and high-hour fishing hulls that never really rest. In that small group, one 150-horsepower 4-stroke keeps showing up long after the decals are faded. The core of that reputation is endurance. Many of these engines live on charter boats, workboats, and high-hour fishing rigs that see more abuse in 3 seasons than a typical pleasure boat will see in a decade. Technicians regularly report BF150 engines reaching 3,000 hours and beyond before any major internal work becomes necessary, provided basic service has been respected. That kind of lifespan turns upfront cost into a different calculation entirely. In recent years, Honda has refined electronics and mid-range performance to match more modern expectations. The 2025 updates bring smoother throttle response and better integration with digital displays, which dealers appreciate on new rigs. But the underlying block and design remain rooted in a philosophy of conservative engineering. No chasing of extreme compression ratios, no fragile edge in the name of headline power. To some boaters, that makes the engine feel less exciting than rival offerings. To dealers responsible for warranty budgets and reputations in small communities, it makes the engine feel like a safe harbor. For 2026, as borrowing costs remain elevated and buyers care more about long-term cost of ownership, an engine that quietly does its job year after year without turning into a financial surprise earns its place near the top of the list. If any of this is raising questions about your own engine, hours, resale value, a weird failure pattern you keep hearing about, drop it in the comments. We pull a lot of future videos straight from the questions that show up under these uploads, and it helps us see which brands and models you are actually worried about. And if you want more of this kind of grounded, no-fluff outboard talk, hit like and subscribe. It tells the platform this stuff matters to real boaters, and it lets us keep digging into the engines most manufacturers would rather not discuss. Number 6. Evinrude E-TEC, Generation 190 to 130. Most engines fade from conversation once the factory stops building them. This group did the opposite. In the mid-range repower world, a certain line of direct injection, 2-strokes, has turned into a kind of quiet obsession for dealers who know exactly what problem it solves. The logic is not sentimental, it is practical. These direct injection, 2-stroke engines deliver torque that feels oversized for their rating, especially on hole shot. On a modest hull, an E-TEC 90 can feel like a 115 horsepower engine from a competing brand, thanks to strong low and mid-range pull. At the same time, their weight figure sits much closer to older carbureted two-stroke engines than to bulky early four-strokes. In a market where many new engines are growing heavier and more complex in the name of emissions and features, that combination is suddenly valuable. Some dealers now treat clean, later-year E-TEC engines almost like collectible tools. If compression is good and service records show software updates and injector maintenance, they buy them quickly and set them aside for customers who need serious power on a hull that cannot tolerate additional stern weight. There are risks. Parts availability is tighter than it once was. Not every technician is fluent in the platform anymore. Owners who neglect proper oil or ignore early warning signs can find themselves with an expensive pile of aluminum. But for dealers who understand the engines and choose carefully, these mid-range E-TEC units have become something close to unicorns. Light, strong, and, when treated correctly, surprisingly efficient. They are not for everyone, and they may never return to production. But in the niche they occupy, they are more in demand in 2026 than many new engines with active advertising campaigns. Number 5. Mercury 154 stroke. When a customer says, "I just need one engine that can do everything," dealers do not reach for something exotic. They reach for the most proven all-rounder they have. In the middle of the horsepower range, 1.4-stroke has quietly become that default answer in a lot of shops. This engine has earned its reputation across an enormous variety of hulls: bay boats, small offshore center consoles, pontoon boats, and work skiffs. It rarely dominates a spec sheet comparison, but it almost never embarrasses itself. Real-world reports place fuel economy in that dependable 2.8 to just over 3 miles per gallon range on typical 19 to 21-foot hulls. Hour meters, ticking steadily past 2,000 hours without major incidents, are common. Used values show buyers trust it. Many clean examples change hands in the low to mid-teens in United States dollars, depending on controls and rigging. Dealers like that, there is almost always a market for them, because that makes trade-in conversations easier and inventory less risky. The design is not cutting-edge in the sense of experimental features. It is cutting-edge in the sense of refinement, enough power for most applications, enough weight control to avoid punishing smaller hulls, and enough durability that technicians are not constantly opening powerheads under warranty. In a 2026 environment, where many buyers want exactly one engine to do everything for the next decade, the Mercury 154-stroke remains an easy recommendation. Number 4. Suzuki DF200A. Some hulls feel fine until you load them with people, fuel, and gear, and then they suddenly feel underpowered. Dealers remember which engines can rescue those boats without hanging a massive block on the transom. In that awkward gap, one 200-horsepower four-cylinder has become a very sharp tool. Dealers appreciate the way this engine transforms certain hulls. A 20 to 22-foot center console that once felt marginal with a 150 horsepower engine can wake up dramatically with a DF200A. Whole shot improves, mid-range cruise stabilizes, and fuel burn often stays surprisingly reasonable, because the engine does not have to work as hard to hold a comfortable speed. From a rigging perspective, its weight comes in substantially below many six-cylinder competitors in the same nominal horsepower category. That means fewer transom reinforcement projects and less worry about how a boat will sit at rest. In markets where shallow draft and stern weight matter, that advantage is tangible, not theoretical. On the resale side, this engine has been quietly moving up the rankings. A few years ago, used prices made it feel like a budget choice compared to more established brands. Now, as word spreads among fishing guides and serious recreational owners, clean DF200A engines are edging up into a price bracket that reflects their real-world performance. Dealers who were once cautious about stocking them now talk about wishing they had ordered more. There will always be arguments online about brand loyalty and local dealer coverage, but judged purely on how much performance and reliability it delivers for the pound and for the dollar, the Suzuki DF200A has become one of the most compelling 200 horsepower options going into 2026. Number 3. Yamaha F300. Offshore skippers do not gamble when they pick big power. They look at which engines have already crossed a lot of bad inlets and come home with nothing more than routine service on the log. Over time, one 300 horsepower four-stroke has built exactly that kind of track record on a huge number of transoms. Owners who run offshore frequently, especially in twin-engine configurations, lean heavily toward this platform when they care about reliability first. Real-world examples of F300 engines reaching 2,500 hours and beyond before needing serious internal attention are not rare. When something does fail, parts networks and technician familiarity are widespread, which shortens downtime and lowers the anxiety around repairs. The engine is not flawless. Early digital control issues and occasional corrosion stories appear in any honest discussion. Yet when dealers and captains do the mental math of what engine they want to be listening to when the forecast is marginal and the inlet is steep, the F300 still lands near the top. Resale mirrors that confidence. Used F300 engines, especially in later production years with clean service records, sit in a premium bracket and often sell quickly. For boaters looking at a new rig in 2026, the knowledge that an engine already has a proven offshore track record, a strong dealer network, and predictable resale makes the equation feel simpler. It is not the newest design in the world. That may be exactly why so many people trust it. Number 2. Mercury V6, 200 to 225 four-stroke. Modern outboards walk a tightrope between adding features and keeping owners confident. Too simple, and they feel dated, too complex, and no one wants to own them out of warranty. In the 200 to 225 horsepower band, one V6 family has started to feel like the balance point dealers were waiting for. These engines balance several competing priorities. They deliver a broad, usable torque curve that feels confident in real sea conditions, not just in marketing graphs. They maintain a weight figure that keeps them viable on a wide range of hulls without overloading the stern. They integrate modern electronics and throttle systems in a way that has, so far, produced fewer horror stories than some earlier digital control experiments across the industry. Technicians highlight accessibility. Routine service items are reachable without contortion. Diagnostic systems are mature enough that tracking down an intermittent issue does not feel like guesswork. That matters more than most buyers realize, because engines that are easier to work on tend to be maintained better, and engines that are maintained better tend to produce fewer painful surprises. On the water, feedback has been consistently strong. Charter captains running these engines report smooth mid-range, quiet operation, and fuel burn figures that are competitive with any peer. Dealers say that when a repower customer comes in asking for something modern, but not fragile, this family is often the first recommendation. It is still relatively early in the lifetime of this platform compared to engines like the Yamaha F300. There may be patterns that only reveal themselves after another 5 or 10 years, but going into 2026, on the evidence available now, these Mercury V6 engines have earned their place near the top of the list in many dealerships that care about long-term relationships more than short-term margin. Number 1. Suzuki DF140 B, G, and DF140BG. Every few years, one mid-range platform quietly takes over repowers without a big marketing push. You notice it when used prices climb and clean takeoffs vanish almost instantly. Right now, in the 100 to 140 horsepower range, that is exactly what is happening with a pair of drive-by-wire four-strokes that dealers keep fighting to keep in stock. What makes these engines different is not a single headline feature. It is how all the parts add up. Electric throttle and shift can be a liability if done poorly, but in this case, dealers report that the systems have been remarkably trouble-free. Shifts are smooth, throttle response feels natural, rigging on modern consoles is cleaner and more flexible. At the same time, fuel burn sits in a range that is competitive with, and often better than, other engines in the 115 to 140 horsepower bracket. Perhaps more important is how they behave in the real world. On 19 to 20, 1-foot bay boats and light center consoles, these engines often feel stronger than older mechanical throttle engines in the same nominal horsepower class. The combination of gearing, fuel mapping, and propeller options helps hulls pop onto plane quickly, without forcing the engine to scream at the top of its revolutions per minute range all day. That matters for comfort and for longevity. Dealers keep a close eye on warranty claim rates, even when they do not talk about it publicly. The early data on these mid-range Suzuki drive-by-wire engines has been reassuring. There are always individual failures, but the pattern does not look like a problem child. Instead, it looks like a modern system that is behaving the way owners were always told digital controls would behave. The used market has already reacted. In many coastal regions, lightly used DF115BG and DF140BG engines are selling at levels that blur the line between used and new dealer pricing. Some dealers openly admit that if a customer comes in with a clean example for trade, they will find a way to make the numbers work, because they know they can place that engine quickly. For 2026, these engines represent something that is increasingly rare in the outboard world, a sense that you are getting modern technology without signing up to be part of a large-scale experiment. They may never be as famous in casual conversation as some of the more flamboyant engines on the market, but among people who make a living matching engines to hulls and then standing behind the results, they have already reached number one. In the end, the outboard bolted to your transom is more than just horsepower on a brochure. It is what gets you home when the forecast shifts, and there is no second chance. Dealers may wear different shirts and sell different brands, but they all remember which engines they do not have to apologize for later. This list is not about hype, it is about patterns, the models that quietly earn trust behind the scenes. If you've run one of these engines, or think a different one deserves a spot here, drop a comment below. We actually read them, and the feedback often shapes future deep dives. And if you found this helpful, or it made you rethink what's sitting on your transom, tap like and hit subscribe. We are building a library of honest, data-backed outboard content with no fluff and no filters. More truth, fewer surprises. That is the idea.